and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics pertaining to astrology, but also I do tarot readings now. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, you can email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description. Thank you. And also, of course, I have started a tarot channel more recently than this channel, and I'm going to also be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment below. So if you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And also, of course, I do tarot readings. So if you're interested in tarot readings, you can email me at the email address in the video description as well. Thank you. So today's topic is going to be a video that I did say that I was going to talk about. Those of you who are subscribed to the channel and probably have watched several of my videos so far, you probably know that I really like to talk about the Arudha Lagna, which is a form of Lagna, which is the Vedic astrology word for ascendant, but it is not the actual ascendant. It is calculated based on a formula, which I have also described in one of my previous videos. If you want to see all the videos that I have done on the Arudha Lagna, you can just search for the words Arudha Lagna on my channel, and you will see all the videos that I have done on this topic, including the video about how to calculate it. So I'm not going to spend time explaining how to calculate it and all that stuff here. However, I am going to start this video with a pretty long introduction, some disclaimers as well, which I think are important to mention. So I have also talked about this in several videos, that the Arudha Lagna is basically how other people perceive you. It is your projection in the Maya. So unlike the Lagna or the ascendant, which can actually point out to your personality and even to your physical appearance in this lifetime, or, determine which characteristics you will inherit from your parents and which you won't, the Arudha Lagna is basically your projection into the Maya. It's how your energy is perceived by other people, but it may or may not really coincide with how you feel inside or how you see yourself, or basically anything that makes the real you. And this is why I think it's really fascinating to analyze the Arudha Lagna, because there's so many things that you can learn based on understanding how you come across, Also, it sheds light upon different areas of your life. It can show, what kind of people will support you, what class of people are more likely to support you based on, their general interest, personalities, careers, and so forth. And I have talked about all these things in previous videos, but also what I'm going to be talking about in this video, most importantly, is the connection between Arudha Lagna showing circumstances of death. And yes, like I said, I also talked about this in several other videos. You can technically determine the circumstances surrounding someone's death by analyzing their Arudha Lagna situation, and the rest of the chart by comparison, or the chart by using the Arudha Lagna as the ascendant. And this is where I'm going to get to the disclaimers part, and please do not skip this, because it is really important that you understand that this can affect you psychologically. And I speak from personal experience. I have also mentioned this as a disclaimer. I actually offer a Arudha Lagna reading, and I always ask clients who get that, would you like me to include potential circumstances of death or not? And the vast majority of people say no, because which is a wise choice. If you know that you are a sensitive, impressionable person, and you know yourself better than anyone else can know you, it is really it's really best actually that you do not watch this video, because if I talk about certain placements and you see that you have certain placements that, this person that whose chart I'm gonna be analyzing today, which is the president of Russia, if you see that you have similar placements, you might start to become, overly sensitive, maybe even a little bit paranoid, maybe even develop phobias. And I mentioned this, and I also include myself in this category because I have looked at my chart a lot, compared it to other people's charts, people who have already passed away. And, like, I wish that I could say it has not affected me, but I'm not that tough. Like, in the sense that I think it has contributed already to, me being sometimes a little bit, not paranoid, but cautious about certain things. And the truth is that nobody can tell you 100% how you're going to pass away. And I'm going to be getting to this part in a bit, a totally different set of disclaimers. But, so nobody can tell you exactly how you're going to pass away. Whenever you look at someone's Arudha Lagna, you're going to see different possibilities and, different configurations that could show various circumstances surrounding the death. So I'm only going to be looking at circumstances of death mainly. I might speculate a little bit on the timing, but not so much. What is important to understand about the timing of death is that, first of all, you also want to look for longevity. So the fact that you see, let's say, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. So you have to look at longevity, and you also have to look at transits. And more importantly, from the Vedic perspective, you want to look at dashas. So dashas show which planets are active at any particular time in your life. And what I have seen is that basically things don't happen, and this is what Vedic astrology teaches, unless it is the right dasha. So, and even then, looking at dashas is not enough. So, and this is why it's important to not become paranoid about the circumstances of death, because you still have to analyze longevity. So there are different calculations, and I will be honest, I haven't gotten into them in depth, but I know where to research, but I haven't looked into them because, again, I don't want to become even more paranoid, by figuring out the longevity calculations, and starting to see different patterns, maybe even in my own chart, that are going to make me hypersensitive. However, there are longevity calculators, which basically can say, this person going to have a short lifespan, a middle lifespan, a long lifespan. So if you, let's say, see that, let me give you an example. If you see that you have Jupiter influencing the circumstances of death in your Arudha Lagna, and you're going through, let's say, the dasha of Jupiter or the Antardasha, or maybe you're going through the dasha of a planet that is aspecting Jupiter, that is conjunct with Jupiter somehow. So somehow Jupiter is being activated by dashas. That does not mean that this is the time when you're going to pass away, because you also have to check longevity. So if a person is, let's say, in their 30s, and they're having their circumstances of death activated, that does not really show that they're going to pass away if they have, markers of a long lifespan. Because if your markers show that you're going to have a long lifespan, it's pretty much very unlikely that you're going to die before the age of 70. See, this is what I'm trying to say. So there are always multiple things to look at. And on top of that, of course, there is the spiritual component, which I do believe in. I don't just, I don't just see astrology as a tool. Technically it is a tool, but I also look at it from a spiritual perspective. And you need to understand that there are always things to consider that are, from a spiritual perspective. Like, if your karma is very positive, it could be that, your lifespan will be extended. Conversely, if your karma is very bad, or if you have entered a life path that really is not in accordance with your higher destiny, it could be that your lifespan will be shortened. And this is the way that I see it, and I have had different pieces of evidence to support this view over the years. I won't get into that right now, but this is my personal view. This is not the Vedic perspective. This is how I see it, in the sense that there is a higher plan out there. There is a higher, how should I put it, judge that decides, this is why you cannot go 100% by astrology. Astrology shows, your general programming in life, but at the end of the day, the programmer can change the programming. You know what I'm saying? We cannot really, unless we can indirectly by watching our karma and trying to be as decent as possible. But at the end of the day, only the programmer can change the programming, So that being said, this is another thing that I was going to say, is that what I have noticed, I've never actually noticed, and I have looked at really quite a few charts, I would say definitely over 100, correlating Arudha Lagna with circumstances of death. And by the way, now that I'm going to say this as a parenthesis, I want to mention that if you actually know people personally who have died under various circumstances, and you know their exact causes of death, and you also know their complete birth information, like their date of birth, the location, the time, and the minute that they were born, I would really appreciate it if you could send me an email, because I would like to analyze what is going on there and to see correlations between, Arudha Lagna and different circumstances of birth. So yes, I would appreciate it if you would do that for the sake of research, Yeah, I know I have weird hobbies. And that parenthesis being closed, what I have seen is that basically you're not going to go until you have a window open. Let me put it like that. So on the other end of the spectrum of what I said previously, right? So previously I said that, if you're going through a dasha or an antardasha that activates your circumstances of death, however, you have markers of longevity that, exceed your current life, your current age, then it's very unlikely that something is going to happen. By the same token, if you are not going through the right dashas or antardashas, it's very, I would say, almost impossible that you will go, and also equally important, not just about timing, the methods by which you will go are very important. And I could talk about this for ages, but let me give an example. Hypothetically, and I will say this, I'm not trying to give suggestions here, I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything violent or anything like that, but I'm just talking for the sake of the craft of astrology and to get you to understand how this works, as far as I have seen. It's like, if let's say you hypothetically would consider ending someone's life, right? But, and let me give you an example, let's say you hire an assassin to kill someone, but in their circumstances of death, they don't have any sun influence, and or any Rahu influence. It's virtually not gonna happen. There's something, at least as far as I've seen, something is going to happen where you're going to be, this assassin is not going to be able to carry out the job. Or even if he or she manages to inflict damage on this person, it will not lead to the person's death. And I have seen this so many times. And this is why, I find it interesting to talk about, because I've actually, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but to give you a little personal story, I've actually tested this. There have been several times where actually like probably 2 times in the past 2 years, where I almost started a fire in my apartment. And I don't mean like on purpose. I feel like that guy in Fight Club here. You think I would burn down my apartment? That apartment was my life. No, I wouldn't. No, not on purpose. But I basically, for instance, forgot a pot on the stove, and I forget about it for like 4 hours because I have ADHD. It's a long story. And I was like, I stopped working and then I went to the kitchen and there was like smoke everywhere. There was like thick smoke on the hallway. I panicked. I thought that I was going to see flames when I opened the kitchen door. But luckily there were no flames. The pot was just there and it was all black because it had been on the fire for like ages. And of course, the whole kitchen was full of like really thick smoke, and I was like coughing, and I panicked. I really panicked. I thought I was gonna have to call, the fire brigade and all this stuff. And this is actually not the first time that I've had like close encounters with fire, like forgot, things burning. I forgot candles burning and I fell asleep and stuff like that. And it's like, and nothing happened every single time. And what I realized when I analyzed my circumstances of death is that I don't have any sun influence around my circumstances of death. Now, of course, I would not advise you to conduct these kinds of experiments and try to test, how much you can push it. But for me, it was like by accident, repeatedly, I figured out that, fire is probably not going to be how I go, because looking at my circumstances of death, I don't have any sun. And also, when the sun and each planet in particular doesn't necessarily, each planet can show different things. So the sun can also show a violent death, and especially when it shows, it is especially connected to methods that involve heat. This is why I said if you don't have sun around circumstances of death, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to die of a gunshot wound. Unless you also maybe have Rahu, maybe there's a possibility. But I've actually seen sun every time where someone was shot to death or they died in a fire or something like that. Or another thing that sun represents that is non-violent is the cardiovascular system. So if you have sun connected to the cardiovascular system, connected to the circumstances of death, it can show death of a heart attack or death of an aneurysm or, I don't know, something, blood clots, stuff like that. It also, of course, depends on what is going on there. What is like, how malefic are the circumstances of death. Generally, the more malefic planets you have around the circumstances of death, the more likely it is that you will have a bad death or an unnatural death, something like violence, an accident, can be all kinds of things, so yeah, being murdered, so basically anything that is unnatural, right? So Rahu, for instance, shows sudden death, can also show death by poisoning or intoxication. Whether it is, how should I put it, purposeful or non-purposeful, whether it's by accidental or non-accidental. That's another thing, for instance, and I actually know this, I know a person like this, someone in my family who actually tried to commit suicide. It's a while ago, and the person was in her 80s and, basically just decided to try to check out early for various reasons. And this person had a bottle of sleeping pills, and she thought that she was going to take a bottle of sleeping pills and was going to, self-delete. And actually what ended up happening was she was in a coma for 2 weeks, and then woke up and had basically an almost full recovery. And considering the fact that this person was in her 80s is pretty amazing. I mean, some people don't wake up after being in a coma when they're in their 20s or 30s. This is also interesting, actually got me to think about people who stay in a coma and then wake up, and what kind of configurations could they have that produces this. But what I think happened, and I looked at this person's chart, is that this person doesn't have any Rahu connected to the circumstances of death. So, and I've actually thought about this For a while, and I have seen this, and I have also mentioned this in other videos, for a while I used to think that Rahu connected to the circumstances of death tends to show people who die by self-deletion. However, that is not necessarily the case. What it actually shows, and what I realized by revisiting some of the cases where I have seen this, Rahu connected to circumstances of death and people dying by self-deletion, in every circumstance, it was a form of poisoning. So either they poisoned themselves by inhaling gas or by taking pills or by overdosing, all kinds of things, whether it was, I'm talking here about self-deletion. But basically, I think it's like, if the circumstances of death do not match with the method you are trying to apply, and again, I understand I'm not trying to create some kind of a tutorial here, but I'm just telling you the way that it is, because, how is it that some people successfully self-delete, some people don't successfully self-delete, And it's like, and I think in this woman's chart, for instance, even though she was in her 80s, ended up making a full recovery and is still alive and well and now in her 90s, and very much lucid, and, still having some mechanical problems, but very, self-aware and very clear-minded for her age. And she doesn't have any Rahu connected to the circumstances of death. So if the circumstances of death don't say you're going to die by poisoning, then you're not going to die by poisoning. You see what I'm saying? The matrix will not allow it, basically. This is what I have noticed. And what was I going to say aside from this? There are different planets, there are different things to check, different influences that mean different things. And of course, it's not easy, because if you look at the Arudha Lagna, the main house that shows circumstances of death is the third house from the Arudha Lagna. That is literally the circumstances surrounding your death. It can even show, location. Like, for instance, if you have, let's say Libra connected to the circumstance of death, you might die in a place that is like an open market, some kind of a public area. If you have, let's say, Leo on the third house of the Arudha Lagna, means you could die somewhere in a hilly area, in a forest area, or someplace where it's really sunny, really warm, Things like that. There are all kinds of different connections, and also connections between planets. And another thing that you also want to look at is connections between houses, because each house shows something else, right? So let's say if you have a connection between the 10th house and the third house from the Arudha Lagna, could show that, death connected to the state. The state orders your execution, for example. This is especially true in the old days, when execution was a thing. Or somehow, I don't know, the government has you assassinated or something like that. Or it could be death, somehow connected to the profession. I've read these, stories about people in Japan who die in the office because they're so exhausted, they're working nonstop. I wouldn't be surprised if you look at those charts and see that they have some kind of connection between, circumstances of death and the 10th house, which is the house of career. So all kinds of different things. But, actually, and the reason I wanted to talk about here, I'm getting to the main subject here, the president of Russia, is because I found it interesting that there were all these rumors, and I came across one article in particular that really caught my attention that said he might have cancer, and that he was spotted walking, part of his entourage. He keeps a doctor, a specialist in, I think it's throat cancer. And that really caught my attention because it was very specific. And when I read that article, I decided to check his horoscope to see what is going on around his circumstances of death. Now, before I continue, I will say, I'm not trying to say that I wish for his death. I don't think it's nice to wish for anyone's death, even if the person in question is a psychopath, unless the person attacks you personally, in which case, let's say it's understandable. Otherwise, it's bad karma to wish for someone's death. So, I'm not saying anything. I am simply speculating at what could happen with respect to his circumstances of death. And this issue of, throat cancer really stood out to me, and it actually matches his horoscope. I have cast his chart again. I have marked the Arudha Lagna. He has Arudha Lagna in Cancer. He has one of those exceptions in calculating the Arudha Lagna, which I don't know if I mentioned in the original video that I made on how to calculate it, but this is the exception that I use now. I should probably make an update on that video. Meaning that if you have the Lord of the Arudha Lagna in the ascendant, so actually, yes, there are exceptions in the sense that if the Lord of the Arudha Lagna falls either in the ascendant or if it falls in the 7th house, so when you calculate the Arudha Lagna by the traditional method, if the Lord falls in the 1st or the 7th house of your horoscope, by comparison to the ascendant, of course, I'm talking about the natal chart. If you have one of these exceptions, you have to add 10 houses to the result that you get, and that's the Arudha Lagna. So if, in this case, if you have the Lord of the Ascendant in the ascendant, you're supposed to add 10 placements, so you get to the 10th house, according to the Vedic astrology calculations, which use, of course, whole sign house system, which means that a sign and a house, overlap entirely. And if you have the Lord, if you, let's say, have the Lord of the 1st house is in the 7th house, and normally, according to the traditional calculation, you have to add 7 placements. But by adding 7 placements, you also get back to the 1st house. And now you, again, have to add 10 placements, and that is the Arudha Lagna, which means, again, it's the sign that sits on your 10th house. If you have Arudha Lagna by the traditional calculations, let's say if the Lord of the Lagna falls in the 4th house, that means... Wait, is it the 4th house? Yeah, if it falls in the 4th house, and that would mean that you have to add 4 placements to get to your Arudha Lagna, so that would make it fall in the 7th house, but technically, it shouldn't be the 7th house sign. So again, you need to add 10 placements to that, and you get to the 4th house. So the 4th house sign will become your Arudha Lagna. Now, as I mentioned also in the calculations video, there are multiple theories about this. There are people who say that there should be no exceptions. There are people who say that the only exception is when the Arudha Lagna is the Lagna itself or the ascendant, that it should never be the ascendant, so that's when you apply exceptions. However, these are the ones that I use right now because I have found them to be most accurate. Okay, so in the president of Russia's case, you have his Arudha Lagna is in Cancer, and the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna is in Virgo. And if you look at his chart, the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna contains the Sun, Saturn, and Mercury. And in his case, the Sun rules the 2nd house. Now, what is the 2nd house? The voice. It's the vocal cords, the throat. It also rules the face, but basically like everything above the shoulders, minus your skull, is kind of connected to the 2nd house. So the rumors that were circulating that he had throat cancer actually match this horoscope. And not only that, that's not the only reason. The fact that he also has Saturn there, which Saturn shows a long suffering. So normally, although it depends on the circumstances, it depends on which influences are more powerful, right? I have seen also Saturn connected to the 3rd from the Arudha Lagna in cases of people who died a sudden death. But that's because they had other more powerful influences. And in his case, it's actually difficult to predict because he also has some placements that could potentially show a sudden death. But it also potentially shows a long suffering. So Saturn shows disease. because Saturn basically is everything that lasts a long time. It takes a long time to come to fruition. So that's the first thing that kind of stood out to me. And then he also has Mercury, the ruler of the 12th house, because it rules Gemini, and it's also the ruler of the 3rd house, which is really interesting. And now the 12th house can show prison, can show isolation. So, and I've actually seen this. For instance, recently I checked Jeffrey Dahmer's Arudha Lagna, and Jeffrey Dahmer had a connection also between the 12th house and the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna, and on top of that, he had Mars in the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna without any other planet sitting there, and he was bludgeoned to death by his fellow inmate in prison. So, and the 12th house can show places of imprisonment, places of isolation, dying in isolation. I think Hitler also had a connection between the 12th house and the Arudha Lagna. I did talk about his circumstances of death as well in a previous video, but I don't remember which one. Maybe it was the one on Capricorn Arudha Lagna, but I'm not really sure. If you're interested to check it out, that's why I'm mentioning it. But in any case, so already I see, first of all, okay, there is a potential there. The cause of death will be disease. And he's also running the Chara Dasha of Virgo, which means that the Virgo sign in his horoscope is being activated, which also happens to be his circumstances of death. He entered the Chara Dasha of Virgo, let me check again, I think around 2019. So the end of 2019, October 2019, and until 2030. So this doesn't mean much. However, it is increasing the light. It shows that this is a time when the window is open. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean he's going to walk through it, but the window is open. So there is a possibility of, the end of life appearing during this time. Aside from that, what I noticed in his chart is he has Rahu in the 7th from the Arudha Lagna. So again, this could be a sudden death. This could be death by poisoning, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Death by poisoning could even be, your body dying due to it doesn't handle chemotherapy, or it could be you take a bad combination of medicine and you unintentionally poison yourself. And this is, again, I'm going to make a parenthesis. This is one of the reasons why I think it's important to study these things, because people should become aware. And again, speaking of poisoning, I looked at this with Heath Ledger's chart, and I remember seeing similar combinations. And, if someone would have told him that he has a possibility of dying by accidental poisoning, maybe he would have been more careful. Who knows? This is why I think it's important. And it's also to some extent important in some ways. It can minimize anxieties, right? To know, for instance, during the pandemic, my mother was constantly paranoid and telling me to wear a mask. And I was like, Ma, relax. I looked at my chart. That's not how I go. I know, people are going to think I'm crazy, but I'm just telling it like it is, telling it like I see it, So, yes, he has Rahu there, which could potentially show a sudden death or death by poisoning. Rahu can also show death by mechanical instrument. This is why I said, when you see Rahu, you could also see death by weapons, contraptions of all kinds, military machinery or whatever. In the future, it will probably be death by your smart refrigerator or the robots that you use to clean your house. But I digress. And he also has Mars aspecting the Arudha Lagna by 8th aspect. So this could also potentially hint to a violent death. Mars can generally show mechanical trauma, blunt force trauma. Things like being beaten to death, stabbed, things that, stab the body. It could be an accident, a car crash, all kinds of things. But generally things that they imply death by physical force, This is why I mentioned, don't listen to this if you're sensitive. Maybe it's too late. Mercury is really interesting. I would say Mercury actually does not necessarily hint to a negative death, but Mercury rules the first of all, it rules the arms and the hands. So if you have a problem with your arms and your hands and you have Mercury connected to the Arudha Lagna, the third from the Arudha Lagna, get that checked in time, because you don't know where, how it might escalate to something more serious. Mercury also rules the respiratory system. So that's another thing. Could be, I don't know, embolism, something to do with your lungs, with the breathing. Suffocation, potentially, if there are a lot of malefics there. But in his case, he has a lot of malefic influences. So I don't think that this is going to be a natural death, to be honest. And also let me see. Also, what is interesting is that Aries is on the 10th house from the Arudha Lagna. So, like I mentioned, 10th house ruled by Mars, and Mars is aspecting the Arudha Lagna, could also potentially show powers of state involved in the death. And let me see, what else do I see? 7th house, Saturn is ruling the 7th and the 8th houses. So can also be that this doesn't necessarily show that the partner, the life partner, is going to murder him or anything like that, but it could show that the life partner is going to be around when he dies. The 7th from the Arudha Lagna, that shows the spouse. So the romantic partner, that's what I mean. Same thing with the children, because Mars rules the 5th house from the Arudha Lagna as well and aspects the Arudha Lagna. And this is another thing that I should have mentioned, but I did mention in other videos. When it comes to what factors should you check to understand the circumstances of death, you mainly want to look at the Arudha Lagna, so the 1st house of the Arudha Lagna chart, and the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna chart. To a lesser extent, you want to look at, and of course, everything that is opposite these houses, because if you have a planet in the 7th or in the 9th from the Arudha Lagna, they will automatically aspect the Arudha Lagna and the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna by opposition. So they will become involved as well. But to a lesser extent, you also want to look at the 8th house from the Arudha Lagna as well. And you want to look at what signs are placed on these houses, what planets are aspecting the houses themselves, and also the lords of the houses and what planets are aspecting the lords of the houses. So all of these things together can point to potential circumstances of death. And what is also very interesting with respect to prediction is that at the end of this year, so 24th of November 2022, he's going to enter the Mercury Mahadasha. The Mercury Mahadasha and Mercury Antardasha. And if you look at his chart, Mercury is placed in the 3rd house from the Arudha Lagna, activating the circumstances of death even further than the previous period. So, again, this doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to go. It just means that the window is open. The window is becoming even more open after November. And this Mercury Dasha will last until 2025. And after that, he has Mercury Ketu, which he has Ketu in the Arudha Lagna. And that also activates. So, let me just say, I would find it very surprising if he is still alive, 5 years from now. 5-6 years from now. I know that sounds kind of grim, but I'm just reading the charts here. Don't shoot the messenger. And yeah, that's pretty much what I can see with respect to his circumstances of death. I just thought it was interesting. Like I said, I got the idea of making this video by reading that article that speculated that he might be sick. And I think, looking at his chart, there is a strong possibility that it's actually true. Because it was very specifically talking about throat cancer, and he has 2nd house connected to the circumstances of death, and also connected to Saturn, which is a signifier of a long illness. yeah, so this is pretty much what I wanted to say, and I'm sorry again if this is a kind of a grim topic, but I did give a heads up in advance that I was gonna do it, and if you watch this video, then I presume you are interested in this. You probably have strong placements in Bharani or Purva Bhadrapada or the 8th house in your horoscope. And yes, if you have appreciated this video, please do not forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you have not subscribed to my channel. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I would recommend that you read the video description because I have written my contact information there. And of course, don't forget to click on the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. Thank you.